Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. I'm going to try and keep this brief. I'm like stealing a moment to record this, so I wanted to go through what we know about Harry's witness statement. I kind of went through this a little bit in my last video. If you watched my last one, I did more of a kind of psychology perspective, kind of like understanding the mindsets, but I thought we could briefly go through the witness statement. Before we get into it, I just want to respond to some of the comments and feedback I've had on the last video. So I completely understand like the anger towards William, and I am the same. I feel the same way. I feel like it goes against, the more you hear, it kind of goes against everything you should think about being a sibling, right? Because I mean, I've got a little brother. We're really close. My brother's like my best friend. But the idea of a sibling doing that to another sibling is just something that's hard to imagine. And the idea that, you know, to shield yourself, you let somebody else get hurt, especially someone you love and someone they love and someone that's vulnerable. You know, remember that obviously Archie and Lily are William's niece and nephew, you know. So allowing the racism to go unchecked, you know, it hurts them. So I understand that it can seem like I'm being quite passive and in the middle. I don't feel that way. But I try and come at it, I try and keep my feelings out of it for the most part for these, because I feel like we can make up our own minds. I'm also very aware, so you're welcome on this channel whether you have faith or you don't. If any sort of religion, you're all welcome here. If you have no religion, if you're an atheist, I am a Christian. I believe in forgiveness and I believe in trying to understand people and still having hope that there's a chance for them to wake up and realise that choosing love is the best answer. And that's why sometimes I know it can be frustrating, because I kind of try not to let those feelings of anger kind of get into the videos. But I hope you can appreciate why I'm kind of doing that, because I feel like I do feel it, especially as a sibling myself. It just goes against everything and I just can't understand it, and I feel very strongly about it. But I try and hold on to my faith and just try and say, right, okay, hope. Hope that things can change. And that's why I try and show empathy towards William, especially with his childhood, because I do think that the childhood they've all grown up in, and I'm actually reading a Charles biography by Jonathan Dimbleby that somebody on this channel actually told me to read, about Charles's upbringing, where he talks a lot about that, because I'm very interested in not excusing adult behaviour, but why, what are the processes, because we can learn from it. Even if those people are too far gone, it can help us with people in the future and stopping other people going down the same path. So I do have empathy and sympathy for William, not in terms of his adult actions and what he's doing, but when I look at the childhood and the kind of weird environment that he was brought up in, although I hold him accountable as an adult, I do still try and think with the empathy, even if it's just in terms of understanding it, because sometimes I think it can be really scary when people do horrible things. The scariest thing for me is when you can't understand why someone's doing it. And I think a lot of us think that when people do horrible things, we think, why would somebody do that? Like, it's just so alien to us. To me, I think it makes me feel safer in some ways to try and understand it and contextualize it. And I don't know, that's how I come at evil, not just on this channel, but in my life as well. So of course I get the same reactions, but I just try and say to myself, okay, try and understand it, even if it means you can make things better for other people. So that's why I'm doing that. Anyway, yeah, I hope that kind of comes across. I don't want it to sound like I'm excusing what seems to be hideous racism, and it is starting to look like, and again, I don't want to say anything that we don't know, but it does sound like it's coming from that camp, doesn't it? Really, it sounds like Meghan and Harry were saying in the documentary, it's not just that they were being like, it's not just that they were letting them get passively eaten by the wolves, it's that they were being fed to them. And that phrasing of being fed suggests not just being passive and silent, does it? It suggests like pointing out a target, which is even worse. Anyway, let's have a look at this witness statement. So I'm using The Guardian for this. I couldn't find like a full version of the witness statement, so they've quoted it. The Guardian is like a kind of centre-left publication in the UK, which I sometimes don't like The Guardian because it can be very, very centrist and gaslighty and annoying. And I talk about that on my the podcast I do with Heather and Daniel, which is a left-wing podcast. But I thought of all the different outlets, it seems to be the easiest one to kind of go through, and it's not behind a paywall. So let's go for it. So basically they paraphrase some of it and they quote other parts. So they pointed out some parts of interest. So obviously, I'll read this to you. Prince Harry has released an extraordinary witness statement as part of a court battle over alleged phone hacking by the publisher of The Sun and News of the World, owned by Rupert Murdoch. Here are some of its key claims. Okay, so number one, Queen Elizabeth II, Harry's grandmother, agreed to take on Murdoch. This is from the witness statement. I remember speaking to my brother and saying something along the lines of, enough of this, I want to get permission to push for a resolution to our phone hacking claims and a formal apology from Murdoch before any of his people are allowed anywhere near the wedding to Meghan in 2018, or words to that effect. I felt very angry about his newspaper's appalling treatment of my wife and frustrated that nothing had been resolved on the phone hacking front during the previous 12 months, and I thought, naively perhaps, that this might prove the perfect opportunity to air our grievances and force a resolution to our phone hacking claims that had, up to that point, been denied to us on account of the secret agreement that had been reached between the institution and senior executives at NGN News Group newspapers, and of course to force an apology from Murdoch. William was very understanding and supportive and agreed that we needed to do it. He therefore suggested that I seek permission from Granny. I spoke to her shortly afterwards and said something along the lines of, "Are you happy for me to push this forward? Do I have your permission?" And she said yes. Unfortunately, despite ... best efforts, both Robert Thompson and Rebecca Brooks of News Corporation and News UK continued to ignore our requests, but then shortly before the wedding, we were informed by Gerard Tyrrell that nothing could be done as NGN were not in a position to apologise to Her Majesty the Queen and the rest of the royal family at that stage, on account of the fact that if they did so, they would have to admit not only was the News of the World involved in phone hacking, but also the Sun, and that was something they couldn't afford to do until the end of the litigation, because it would seriously undermine their settlement strategy across all other claims. And something I find very reassuring about Harry, and you know that I differ from Harry politically in lots of ways, and I have very different ideas on the military, but this is somebody who is seeking truth, and I feel like people who don't have things to hide are more open. You know, so he's not asking people to speak for him, he's not trying to sneak out his opinions through like royal experts. He's very much, these are my words, I'm happy to put my name to them. If I'm wrong about something, I apologise, but these are my words. He's very upfront and transparent, which is kind of the opposite with, you know, what's going on with the firm. And to this day, people still don't realise that royal experts are obviously the mouthpieces for the royal family. They still can't get it into their heads, and it drives me insane. We've got Harry trying to push forward with a resolution because it's coming up to his marriage to Meghan in 2018. He really wants to get it settled and set the boundaries before the wedding, you know, with Murdoch. And again, we can look at this in our lives because, you know, people often say, you know, be peaceful, be kind, and I always believe in that because of my faith. But also, people have to understand that respect is a two-way thing. And if someone's not treating you with respect, if somebody is acting in an abusive or intimidating way towards you, then you're allowed to set a boundary, and that's not unloving. So what Harry's done here is said, look, I'm happy to like let this go, but first I need an acknowledgement that it was wrong and to know that it won't happen again. And that's actually a really healthy way to deal with things. And the way that some people are presenting this as him being sulky in some way or difficult is the complete opposite of what's happening. We have here that he would have been okay with an apology, just the acknowledgement that wrong was done and that we can move forward. And bear in mind, Harry's someone who's made a lot of mistakes in his life, right? So he understands the value of changing your behaviour. Unfortunately, it looks like Murdoch and his people have absolutely no interest in accountability. And you can't recover after something like that happens until people take accountability for their actions. You know, I always say that in an apology, it works and forgiveness works because the person feels bad about what they've done, they're open about that, they actively want to change, you know, and if we make apologies, you know, we would hopefully change our behaviour. If you're just apologising just for show, it's not about the other person and it's not a real apology. We kind of spoke about that in the Jeremy Clarkson video, didn't we? So Harry says he felt really angry about his newspaper's appalling treatment of Meghan, and he was frustrated that nothing had been resolved. And again, the idea that Harry is kind of being encouraged to kind of quiet down, and I know he says here that William was very understanding and supportive, but you know, that might have changed. But you'll see time and time again that Harry's anger, and it's rightful anger, you know, a lot of the time in society we see anger as a bad thing. Like, for example, you know, during segregation, you know, the civil rights movement, you know, gay rights, trans rights, people who are angry about oppression happening are not crazy. You know, there's a difference between anger is quite a neutral emotion, I believe. You know, I think it's right. If we see an injustice, we should feel angry. If someone's being hurt, we should feel angry. Of course, how we act on our anger can be good or bad and appropriate or inappropriate. But the feeling itself of anger can be a really good force for good. And a lot of, like, you know, getting votes for women, you know, segregation, all these different things, the end of apartheid, anger plays a huge part. And the idea that we always present anger as a bad thing is hugely damaging. And here in Britain, it really helps us to not progress our systems, because someone being angry is seen as being bad without context. It makes perfect sense that you'd be angry about the coverage, the phone hacking, you know, abusing your boundaries and stalking you. And also allowing your wife to be so hurt in a racial manner, that's rational anger. And the way people keep presenting Harry as like this dangerous, dangerous person, no, emotions are neutral things and we can learn from our emotions. If we feel angry at injustice, there's not a problem with you feeling anger. Now, what you do with your anger is another story. You know, people can feel angry about things and do things that aren't great. But the actual feeling of anger, sometimes you need to hold on to it because it helps you to get justice. So Harry specifically went to the Queen, Elizabeth II, and we know that Harry really respects her in the system. She's kind of like, you know, the big matriarch of the family, and he got permission to do that. So, you know, there's been a lot of smears that Harry is betraying the Queen. There's a lot of people, if you ask them, oh, why do you hate Harry and Meghan? They'll say, oh, because they're disrespectful to the Queen. And then you say to them, where? What have they said against the Queen? And they have nothing, because they have never spoken badly of the Queen. They have spoken badly of the institution and the handling of things. But on a personal level, the respect that's had for the Queen, you know, the way Harry, it seems to me that Harry was quite close to the Queen. And this is just speculation. I wonder if there's a certain amount of jealousy in the family over that, because it does seem like they got on pretty well. And it's interesting, isn't it, that they weren't given their apology, because that would mean having to admit fault. And doesn't that defeat the object of an apology, right? So if the newspaper groups actually were apologetic, they could apologise. But they want to do, oh, I want it to go away, so I'm going to say I'm sorry, or something to that effect, but I'm not actually sorry about what I'm doing. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what Harry wants. And remember, people who come forward about this kind of things, and, you know, in the workplace, you know, that kind of thing, whistleblowers, I always try and be forgiving. And I think of myself as quite a forgiving person, and sometimes I have to have a word with myself, because some things I find very hard to forgive, but I try and make myself. But again, you can only really forgive if somebody's sorry. Now, you can forgive in your heart because you can think to yourself, I understand that someone's been through something, and you can understand what they're doing, and you can in your heart say, I'm not going to hold something against you. But for a kind of reconciliation to happen, there has to be acknowledgement from the person that's hurt you of wrongdoing. You know, it's very complicated. Okay, so the next bit from the witness statement. It says that his father, now King Charles, intervened. With hindsight, I now understand why staff at Clarence House, representing Charles and Camilla, were being so unhelpful and were seemingly blocking our every move. They had a specific long-term strategy to keep the media, including NGN, on side in order to smooth the way for my stepmother and father to be accepted by the British public as Queen Consort and King respectively, when the time came, and anything that might upset the apple cart in this regard, including the suggestion of resolution of our phone hacking claims, was to be avoided at all costs. This was because of the secret agreement which had been reached between NGN and the institution, and there would be no actions until the end of the litigation. Indeed, when I did actually issue my hacking claims against both MGN and NGN in October 2019, I was summoned to Buckingham Palace and specifically told to drop the legal actions because they have an effect on all the family. This was a direct request, or rather demand, from my father, Edward Young, Private Secretary to the Queen, and my father's Private Secretary, Clive Alderton. So this is, I think, the most gutting thing, but we kind of already have come to terms with this, and Harry's spoken about it. You know, the feeling that he didn't necessarily realise that the enemies and the calls coming from inside the house, basically, right? The person, he's thinking that his family, because you would, you know, in a healthy family, you support each other, you love each other, you help people get justice, you try and create peace, you make things better. You know, it's not a competition. In dysfunctional families, it's a competition. People are fighting for love, fighting for resources. That's not healthy, and in some ways that can be really abusive. And Harry's still living under this impression that people want the best for him, right? And I think he's starting to realise, wait a second, I'm being blocked. And you do second guess yourself, because he will have been thinking, he will have agonised over this, as people in these situations will. Or if you can hear stuff downstairs, Mum just got in. But he's obviously thinking, surely not. Surely it can't be them that are trying to block this. And it's this kind of slow realisation that he is a victim of the media, but his family are complicit in it, right? Effectively feeding him to it. So it's just shocking to any of us watching from the outside, obviously having not lived in a system like that a parent would do that and kind of expect the child to take the sacrifice for the sake of the parent, right? Usually in a healthy family, that will be the other way around. But what we have is Harry being told that he can't have justice because it would presumably not be great for his father and for Camilla. And there's some real like alarm bells ringing there. And I think reading this witness statement, we're really starting to understand some of the dynamics at play. So essentially what's happening here, if we try and put it into more of like a real world perspective and not like the monarchy, is Harry with his claim is being asked to put his needs aside, his boundaries, basically his sense of being, and justice aside for the sake of the family as a whole. right? Because it's seen as causing trouble. So he's basically being guilted with the fact that, oh, it will have an effect on the family if you take the papers to court. Now, what do we know about the papers and how they operate and the tabloids? So if they've basically got the family in a stranglehold here, and they've got things on the family that they can release whenever they want, now to us, it obviously doesn't make sense that you would play nice with those people, because the more you get into bed with the tabloids and they will eat you next. Like, as we speak about this all the time, they will come for you next. There's no appeasing them, and every time you try to appease them, you make them more powerful. But Harry has, according to this, got the specific go-ahead from the Queen, but it's been blocked. So he started to realise that his own father, according to this, and his stepmother don't want him to get justice and won't protect Meghan, because let's not forget the racial element. These papers are not just, it's not the usual smears. This is actually racism and othering, which is causing Meghan to feel like she wants to take her own life. He's now having to understand that in order to set his own boundaries and protect himself, the risk is there that he's going to be upsetting the family. Now, that's not a healthy dynamic. So we always try and relate this back to, family structures and what we can learn in our lives. And again, what we know about healthy relationships, be they friendships, relationships, or family. Like, the idea is, in a good and healthy form of love, that you encourage people to have their boundaries, their respect, and to stand up for themselves, essentially. But it seems that Harry standing up for himself is causing a lot of trouble. So not only is he getting it from the tabloids, he's also getting it from inside the family. So to us, that seems incredibly unhealthy, and I feel like we're all really happy that he got out of there, because this is not an environment where he's being protected and where his wife is being protected, essentially. He's being asked to put his needs aside for the sake, according to this, of his father and his stepmother. That should not be that way around. Like, think about how messed up that is. It shouldn't be that a father expects their child to take that sort of abuse just for their own benefit. Like, that's not good parenting. Okay, so the next part of the witness statement is this. So he talks about the life of his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, and how it could have been saved. I'm going to quote it. This sort of unlawful activity, including phone tapping, hacking, made her, Diana, distrust her protection officers, as she thought they were leaking private information about her, which I believe is one of the reasons she insisted on not having any protection after the divorce, as I am told by the institution. If she had police protection with her in August 1997, she'd probably still be alive today. People who abuse their power like this need to face the consequences of their actions. Otherwise, it says that we can all behave like this. Okay, so I believe, and I can't find it on this statement, but I believe Harry actually used the words that his mother wasn't paranoid and she was right. I'm so glad he said this, because we all know that William made the statement in which he did say that his mother was paranoid, and it's all kind of starting to come together. Like, we can kind of understand maybe why William might have said that, if we're looking at like deals with the family and why he wouldn't want to scare the abusive media, which again makes no sense, because you're just giving them more power and they will turn on you. Like, they will turn on him. And it also puts into perspective Diana's, I'll put in quotation marks, paranoia. Like, we know that there was phone hacking, so even if they weren't specifically phone hacking Diana, the knowledge that there was stalking and phone hacking means that it's reasonable for her to believe that at any point she could be being listened to, right? And it's interesting here where he talks about her not having protection after the divorce, because she literally can't trust that those people want her safety. And what we see from the firm and the institution, everything we hear about this, is that they operate like a business where any single person in that system will be sacrificed for the sake of the firm. Literally any of them. It's also interesting that he puts in brackets, as I am told by the institution, about not having any protection. So he's been told that she didn't want the protection for that reason, but there's doubt as to, was it taken away from her? Remember, the protection was taken away from Harry, so this could be a technique that the firm uses, because we know that when someone stands up against power, institutions, right, when they speak their truth, there are lots of different coercive ways in which people are kind of indoctrinated and pressured into backing down. We've seen it happen with Harry and Meghan, right? We've seen them have their security stripped from them and their children, even when the police have told us that there were credible threats to their life. We've had their home taken away. So is this part of the pattern, right? The threat that if you go against us, you lose your security, right? Literally, not just your actual like security in terms of security guards, but your actual sense of security, like leaving you to the wolves. It's a really kind of coercive form of abuse, isn't it? It's a withdrawing of support and funds and basically resources that people need as a threat. And it's very, very hard to be able to define that if people don't understand these systems. Okay, and I have to say I love this bit. People who abuse their power like this need to face the consequences of their actions. Otherwise, it says we can all behave like this. And this is why I have a lot of time for Harry, specifically because he talks about his own mistakes. He owns them and he's trying to do better and to change. And this also explains why he's being so smeared by the papers. I mean, there's probably about 5 or 6 different reasons that they've kind of been made, him and Meghan have been made like the kind of avatar of woke politics, right? Even though they're liberals, they're not really left. I mean, Harry's still a monarchist at this point. I'm not sure about Meghan, but they've been made the avatars. So people can have like acceptable racism, basically, right? And they can other them. They're hate figures in the great pantomime. But also the problem, as I've said in other videos, is that Harry's the sort of person that, and I don't know why or how this has happened because it's quite miraculous, but he's the sort of person who will speak truth to power. So he's not really afraid of power, or if he is willing to do what is right, even if that's difficult for him. So something in Harry's personality is that if something is wrong and he thinks something isn't just, he's going to say it. He's going to say it openly with his own words. He'll take the fallout if it doesn't work, but he's very big on accountability, right? And we see that, you know, in his autobiography, which I will at some point like do some more videos on. It's just there's been so much. Something that Harry seems to understand is he understands generational trauma, generational abuse, generational power. He understands the workings of the system, and he seems to be able to apply that to dynamics in the family, to dynamics in, you know, society and standing up to power. He seems to have that knowledge, and I do wonder, you know, when he did the talk with Dr. Gabor Mate, and they spoke about Harry potentially being neurodivergent. Now, something with neurodivergence, this bizarre thing, which is kind of a cool thing, is that it means that people are able to see patterns in things very quickly, and they can apply patterns that they've learned in one situation very, very quickly to other patterns in some cases. And I kind of wonder if that might be at play with Harry. We've also got the fact that Meghan probably was a huge turning point, because in a system like that, so if Harry was the scapegoat in the family system at that point, he was kind of, you know, we've read from the book, there was neglect, there was love when he was in his role, but if he stepped out of line, there was a lot of disappointment and kind of coercive kind of control going on. So meeting Meghan was a threat because she's kind of a little bit older, she's lived a bit, she's lived outside the system, so she's really kind of teaching him to respect himself, you know, to know boundaries, and that it's okay to have boundaries. You know that Meghan's good with her boundaries. We remember when she she said to William, please get your finger out of my face, and she did it very politely and articulately. But Harry's growth process, again, which this is how we know that there's dysfunction, because in a healthy situation, you know, you want the people around you that you love. The idea of healthy love, as we all know, is to build someone up to be confident in having their boundaries, right? To have independence, self-confidence, to be able to stand up for themselves, and you want to be part of that growth process. We saw the opposite thing happening with Harry. Whenever he tried to get out of his role in any way, he was seen as getting above himself. There were kind of subtle punishments, very deniable, but subtle punishments to kind of bring him back to heel. So I think that having been in that situation where he was essentially gaslighted for a long period of time, which is, we know they did the same to Diana, you know, being gaslit about this, seems to have given him this principle, doesn't it? That there have to be consequences for actions. And he kind of stands by that. And I feel like that's relatable to a lot of us. Also, I think the fascinating kind of thing about this is that, you know, the pro-monarchists have, you know, en masse decided that they really can't stand Harry. But I would argue, as a really big anti-monarchist, right, I really hope the system just completely fails. I hate it so much. But I would argue that the way forward for the modern monarchy, thinking with a PR brain here, would have been to modernise. Right? So you'd slightly change your PR, you'd change your selling point, you'd change the image, you'd move with the times. Now, bizarrely, Harry is the only one who actually is offering that, because he's still pro-monarchy, but he's offering a new age of accountability, like a different way to connect with people. But they're shutting that down. You know, I think a lot of young people, they're saying, aren't they, have kind of fallen away from the idea of the monarchy, which makes perfect sense to me because it's not democratic at all. But something that I think a lot of young people, because of social media, are aware of is they're aware of abuse dynamics and boundaries and things that maybe other generations didn't have the resources. Right? We've had the internet. They didn't necessarily have the resources to do that kind of work. And something that this generation does care about is accountability and growth. The institution has taken the line that it's not going to grow, right? It can't admit fault because that would make it look weak. They don't seem to understand that if they really wanted it to appeal to younger people, the smartest move would actually be to admit The smartest move would be to move forward, admit the mistakes, and try and do better. It's great for us that they're not doing that, but it's really fascinating that they're so stubborn they can't do that. Okay, the next part. Prince William received a secret payoff from Murdoch's business. Okay, and this is the quote. Judging by Miss Mossman's, a lawyer representing Murdoch's News Group newspaper's witness statement, my brother appeared to know an awful lot more than I did on the subject of phone hacking, although he did not tell me if that was the case. However, NGN still settled his claim for a huge sum of money in 2020 without subjecting him to a similar strikeout application, without any of the public being told, and seemingly with some favourable deal in return for him going quietly, so to speak. This goes to prove the existence of the secret agreement between the institution and senior executives at NGN. If it wasn't in place, then why on earth did William wait until 2019 to bring this claim in circumstances where our two private secretaries brought and settled claims back in 2012, and where he knew far more about the matter back then than I did? And also, why didn't NGN test its limitation argument against him? Okay, so obviously this is the big news that has come out of this, and everyone's kind of talking about the payoff that William took. And yeah, I mean, I've kind of spoken about this psychologically speaking, but also I try and hold empathy because it must be a horrible situation. I do feel like the royals are kind of hostages at this point because obviously the media have a lot on them, so it must be quite frightening. I kind of did that in the last video, but it is kind of gaslighty, right? So it's, again, Harry thinking that the people around him are wanting what's best, but really they're kind of throwing him under the bus, right? Whatever they can do to help their own reputations and just letting him take it. And again, it's so interesting because, you know, Harry said for a while, he has spoken for a while about this idea of the secret agreement. And people have been like, oh no, he's just lying, it's not true, it's not true. But even people who don't like Harry, and I've said this before, right, you don't have to agree with him politically. I don't agree with him politically. He's a monarchist and kind of a middle liberal, I think. But what he's saying is turning out, bit by bit, to be correct. And that also makes sense of a lot of his confidence when he speaks, because something that is like a saving grace. Where did I read this? I read this in What Katie Did. It's this book that I used to read when I was younger. Something about the saving grace that truth tellers have in any situation is that you can have solace that you know you're speaking the truth as you see it. And therefore it gives you a sort of protection because you're not having to cover up for yourself, you know, you're not having to, you know, rewrite things, you're not having to lie. And there's a kind of solace in that. And you can really, really see that with Harry. People are trying to act like, you know, they say Meghan's rebranding and you know, they try and make a big deal out of what they say. But what those two have said has been pretty consistent throughout. For anyone following this, you know, if you're looking at a situation like that, you have to look for consistency, right? Because people who are telling the truth are consistent because they don't need to change their story, right? They might get into more detail or less detail at certain points, depending on what they're asked, but it's been consistent throughout. That cannot be said of the rest of the firm. So we've got, you know, like royal experts who Harry alleges are kind of arms of the royal family, either denying claims or throwing out like random counterclaims, like, oh, okay, they're saying this awful thing about us. And they can't just say, no, it didn't happen, because that would be a lie and they might get sued. So instead, that's why we see whenever something like that happens, we see this like barrage of anti-Meghan stories, which are just total lies, right? To kind of cover themselves. Because they can't just say, that's not true. They don't want to get into it. So they're either silent or they put out something counter about Meghan to hopefully distract people. Okay, next bit. Phone hacking meant Harry was perceived as, in quotation marks, an idiot and was at risk of attacks. It even got to the stage where the tabloids would routinely publish articles about me that were plainly wrong, but interspersed, I had to do that so many times, I can't pronounce that word, with snippets of truth, which I now believe were most likely gleaned from voicemail interception and or unlawful information gathering. This created an alternative and distorted version of me in my private life to the general public, people that I had to serve and interact with as part of my role in the royal family, to the point where any one of the thousands of people that I met or was introduced to on that given day could easily have said, you know what, you're an idiot, I've read all the stories about you and now I hate you and I am going to stab you. I feel like there isn't a lot to say here because we already kind of know how this works and we've like really covered it, but yeah, it does put him in actual physical risk. And you know, we know there were actual far-right attacks and people saying things like Harry's a race traitor, right? There have been actual attacks, racial things about Meghan and the children, which has put them at risk. And again, you know, I think when people say, you know, oh, the firm are being neutral here, you know, oh, Harry's the bad one, he's taking it on, you know, he's being angry, but it's not neutral. You know, I feel like people who don't understand oppression dynamics, you know, in terms of politics, they think that being neutral and being silent is always the position, the morally superior position, right? That's not true. The position, I believe, if there's an injustice, you have to stand against the injustice. If you believe the neutral position is being silent, what happens when an injustice is happening in front of you and you don't do anything about it. So he's speaking rightly about how the public are kind of being whipped up into a hatred where they could physically hurt him. And you'll have seen, you know, Jeremy Clarkson's piece about Meghan Markle was not just the usual kind of nastiness, was it? There was a kind of violent, humiliating, almost sexual edge to it, you know, and we've seen that with a lot of the coverage of Meghan that we've looked at on this channel. It's a genuine, unnecessary hatred that people have for Meghan. You know, if you ask people here, people who've been reading the tabloids, you see some of the things they put online about Meghan, it's like they think she's a pantomime villain. They have dehumanized her to the point that she's not a real human being. And when you dehumanize someone to that degree, you put them at great risk of physical harm, right? Because you've taken out the empathy. And the tabloids have a huge part to play in that. They've made her this, like, fairy tale figure, the wicked witch in the story. Okay, Harry's relationships were affected. Whenever I've been in a relationship, I've always tried to be the best partner that I possibly could, but every woman has her limit. Unfortunately, they are not just in a relationship with me, but with the entire tabloid press as a third party. At no point did I have a girlfriend or a relationship with anyone without the tabloids getting involved and ultimately ruining it, or trying to ruin it, using whatever unlawful means at their disposal. We've spoken about this in some videos about Spare, because Harry talks a lot about this. And I feel like you're going to probably get bored of this talking point, but you know, the way that they're living, the royals, it might be hyper privileged in terms of money, you know, financially, but emotionally speaking, it is basically a hostage situation, right? A blackmail situation, a stalking situation, and those kids are born in, right? They don't decide to opt in at a certain point. And again, we can talk about why they might do this. I mean, obviously they needed Harry to be the spare. I mean, obviously in that system it's heir and spare, but if we're looking at family dynamics, it's basically the golden child and scapegoat dynamic, isn't it? And the function of the scapegoat basically is to make sure that for whatever reason the golden child represents the family in a good way. So if we look at the monarchy, obviously it's because William is quite literally the heir. The hopes and dreams of that monarchy are on William. They don't want him to abdicate, they don't want him to do anything shameful, therefore it seems they try and cover things up, and that's why they need the spare. That's why a family needs a scapegoat, because then they can look at that other person. It's just a big distraction technique. We see this with oppressed groups as well. You know, have you seen, like, you know, for example, when the government's about to do something really evil to refugees or asylum seekers, suddenly they'll create trans panic, right? They'll be like, oh, look over there, look at these evil trans people. So it was very important for them at the time that Harry had the reputation as being the difficult party prince. Obviously, it seems that that's not even the case, but that was his role, okay? Because the whole point of the monarchy means you don't get to choose, and they've got a problem if in any way the spare seems like a better fit than the heir. So we had a slightly different dynamic in the generation beforehand, didn't we, with Charles and Anne? Because I think the gender difference kind of saved it. And I'm reading a book about Charles at the moment, which I've spoken about before, which is really fascinating, about how those kind of gender roles worked and how in different ways it was kind of humiliating for him, and he felt a lot of pressure because Anne had the qualities as a child that were maybe more traditionally meant to belong to men in that time period, and how difficult that was for him. But in the situation with Harry and William, we've got two brothers, so it's more competitive. They have to make the heir look best, because again, in a system where it's hereditary, you know, you don't get to choose because it's not a democracy, the whole system kind of falls apart if you look at it. If the two of them grow up and people think, wait, maybe the second one would be better, right? Because then people start thinking about democracy. They start thinking about, wait, maybe we should choose. Maybe it should be based on merit. And then they start going down the whole rabbit hole of anti-monarchy in the end. So they have to raise William up no matter what. And it isn't all his fault, because he's born in, and he's born with the weight of all those generations of history on his shoulders and all the hopes of the firm. You know, we say there was like a kind of period where Harry was kind of loved by the press again, and it was when he was playing third wheel with William and Kate. You know, he was offering like the comedy. It was always going to be difficult when he found a partner because of the way the system runs. It's very unfortunate that he found a partner that, just to say, you know, just to begin with, was quite opinionated, intelligent, articulate. That caused a bit of an issue. You know, there's a bit of glamour around Meghan because she was an actress and she's from America. You know, we've got the kind of racial vibe as well. So I think there's a lot of people that wouldn't like to say that they were racist but weren't happy about that. Remember the articles about Meghan's exotic DNA making the blood thicker? Part of Harry's role, in some ways, kind of meant that he was meant to be second best, right? He can't ever eclipse William in any regard. And that's not just, and I show empathy for the family here because it's not just their faults. You know, they're born into a firm and a business, right? They're born into a PR firm. Their whole lives are mascots, trying to sell this idea that none of them really wanted. I wonder if part of the reason why they have to keep doing this with Harry's relationships even before Meghan is because they need him in that role. They absolutely need him in that role. That's how these systems run. And you see that in normal like family dynamics as well, with the golden child and the scapegoat. It is very, very important that a dysfunctional system has a scapegoat at any one time, and the scapegoat can change. Obviously it doesn't in the royal family, because they were born with roles. You know, they literally were born as the heir and the spare. But if you look at it in a family system, there always has to be a scapegoat to carry the family ills and the family problems, right, to point at every single time, and it can rotate. That was Harry's whole role. Okay, the tabloids hoped he would have a public breakdown. Having seen me grow up from a baby, being born into this contractual relationship without any choice, and scrutinised my every move, the tabloids have known the challenges and mental health struggles that I have had to deal with throughout my childhood and adult life, in large part created by them, and for them to then play on that and use that to their own advantage while weaponising mental health, I think is truly appalling. Despite them all knowing about what I was dealing with throughout the years, they kept on doubling down their efforts rather than letting up. That is grotesque and sadistic, and no doubt they were hoping for a total and very public breakdown, and he has hit the nail on the head, and it is just absolutely crushing that his family were on board with this. And again, it's because at any cost in the royal family, the heir has to look good. They needed Harry to always be the messy one, the bad one. And I'm going to make a video soon about the Cambridge children, not about them as children, they're innocent kids, but the coverage of them that we've seen recently. You know, if you've seen how weird it is, all the different articles that have randomly come out about them recently, which makes me uncomfortable, because I feel like if they were my children, you know, again, they're being made into mascots, right? They're being made into their role. But something that we're seeing that Louis, for example, in this pantomime fiction, is being presented as the kind of quirky, kooky one, right? The overdramatic, all the difficult one. We are once again seeing the Harry and William roles happening, right? Golden child, scapegoat. They have to raise up George. I'm sure they're nice children, you know, I don't know. But you're already starting to see that happening. So what Harry's saying here is very wise. You know, the idea was to put him into breakdown. And the reason they did the same thing to Diana. So the idea is that, so in a system like this, you know, we've spoken about the truth teller in a dynamic. The person, it can't be that the system is wrong, right? People have to cling to that system because they don't like the idea of growth and kind of looking at patterns and things like that. So there's got to be a person that's wrong. So if you have a person who stands up against it like Diana did, they then drove Diana to more severe mental health issues, so that when she crumbled, they could look at Diana and say, look, there's the problem. Now, obviously, if you have, you know, an awareness of these dynamics and how they work, then you know that that's a very, very familiar playbook. And that's, again, what they tried to do with Harry, right? Full breakdown would have worked, because then he's still the party prince, right? Because when he joined the military, he wanted to turn his life around, he really wanted to serve. And as we see in the book, there was actually no way out. Because what did he get for that? He got jealousy from people, right? People tried to bring him down. He wasn't appreciated for it. And I think the penny dropped for him that, oh, okay, my role is always to be second best. My role is to be subservient, and I'm not actually supposed to escape it. And in fact, if I do escape it, it's going to get worse for me. We've seen the same thing with Meghan as well, because they dehumanise people. So we know that Meghan was suicidal, right? And if you've seen some of the evil, wicked things they wrote about that, there is a complete lack of empathy. And I've said this before, even monarchists, I don't believe, have empathy for the royal family as people. I honestly don't. I think anyone who had true empathy for that family would be anti-monarchists, because if you look at the system and how it runs, those people that are born into it, especially the children, it is a heavily abusive system. Okay, the British people are being brainwashed by the tabloid press. The fact they're all ganging up to protect each other, like they first did after the Leveson inquiry, is the most disturbing and dangerous part of it all. It is clear to me that the tabloid press are the mothership of online trolling. Trolls react and mobilise to stories they create, not the other way around. Though plenty of headlines are knowingly created from troll accounts while giving the impression that this is what the UK public think and feel. This is brainwashing at the highest level. People die as a result of trolling, and people will continue to take their own lives when they can't see any other way out. How much more blood will stain their typing fingers before someone can put a stop to this madness? Okay, I feel like we've gone over this like in depth in other things, but the thing that really like stands out to me here is what he says about how they react and mobilise to stories they create. And we've seen this. It's a very lucrative industry for people. So you'll see people deliberately taking Meghan out of context. Remember Camilla Tominey lying about the fact that, you know, Meghan had said that Archie was a voracious reader, right? And doing that on This Morning and saying that, oh, you know, that's crazy because the child was too young. And then you listen to the soundbite and it's actually saying that he loves books. You know, he has a voracious appetite for books, and she goes on to say how her and Harry read to him. So they create the negative headlines, which aren't even true, that they've created themselves. Then they create outrage around the headlines. And again, it puts the victim into a situation where they can't win. They can't even take on what's been said, because first they have to get past the point of saying, wait, that's not even true. That's been taken out of context. They did the same thing to Jeremy Corbyn here, and I talk about that a lot on this channel. And this is how it works. The idea of, well, giving the impression that this is what the UK public think and feel. Yeah, he's right. If you look at the indoctrination that's happened here in the tabloids, and I've probably been covering this for about a year and a half now, and I wish I'd been doing it for longer, honestly, because it's really fascinating and quite disturbing. But if you look at how these smear campaigns run, it's a sense that it's part of Britishness now, right? To be angry. Like, we've got this collective idea about Harry and Meghan, and they're against us and they're against our monarchy. And people have been indoctrinated over quite a long period of time. And then they do polls from those people, right, in the tabloids, and it will be like majority nasty things. And they'll use that to say, oh, look, everyone does hate them, as if there hasn't been an indoctrination campaign. It was like with Jeremy Corbyn, obviously. Jeremy Corbyn had a very socialist manifesto. And obviously the media were quite frightened of him, centrists were frightened of him, because he offered something different. It wasn't just, oh, we're changing colours, but we're not really going anywhere either way. His manifesto was quite radical for here. He's a democratic socialist. So there was a campaign in the papers to absolutely destroy him. And it was pretty successful, right? A lot of those smears. And they threw so many smears at Jeremy Corbyn. Like, if we look at the early years, before the anti-Semitism smears stuck, they tried so many different things. And they didn't care that they were contradictory, because in smear campaigns, it doesn't matter. They just try and latch onto anything they can. So after this smear campaign, and also like a coup from within his own party, Jeremy Corbyn didn't win the general election. Although he did get a really, really high turnout, it was told, oh, look, he was always unelectable. Look, he could never have done it. Look, he's lost. And it's like as if our main media hadn't been working to destroy this man, as if people in his own party, careerists, hadn't been trying to destroy this man. They kind of changed the inciting incident, right? They changed the process of events. They start it from, oh, look, he was never electable in the first place, when really we're talking about them making that happen. It's self-fulfilling, because they basically ran a smear campaign against him. Okay, these are criminals masquerading as journalists. When I think about the fact that senior executives at NGN not only knew about and condoned phone hacking as a practice at both News of the World and The Sun, but also actively sought to cover it up by the deliberate concealment and destruction of evidence on an industrial scale, my immediate thoughts are that this makes them criminals, not journalists. The fourth estate is too important and rightly powerful to have criminals masquerading as journalists running the show. They have lied under oath, perjured themselves in the process, and have proven they're above the law. Everyone seems to be scared of them, especially politicians. And I am so, so glad. I honestly so glad. That, and you wouldn't think, would you? And I think a lot of socialists feel this way. You wouldn't think we'd be sitting here feeling glad about a prince doing this. But he's right. And I have this theory that if you understand the system, maybe in a family level, right? Or a workplace level, if you've seen the system, you understand the system happening in other places. Also, I will make a video about Jeremy Corbyn and Harry, and the fact that he's actually spoken very nicely about both Harry and Meghan and against the smears against them, because it was a similar playbook used against Jeremy Corbyn in a different sphere. But Harry's right. Everyone seems to be scared of the tabloid. They're like the ultimate school bullies, right? In the Labour Party right now, we've got a leader who I believe myself is a bully, but he's also afraid of the media, and he's working with them because he knows he needs them in order to get elected. He's kind of trying to do a Tony Blair. So basically not standing up against the injustice, going along with the injustice, dog whistling the injustice, dog whistling racism. Basically, in order to get elected here, you have to prove you're not going to change the system, so the papers don't come at you. Because anyone who's actually going to change the system, the papers will turn the people against. We're at this terrible situation right now. But Harry is right, we need people in life who aren't scared. You need people who are going to be that shield and stand up to the bullies, because once one person does it, it makes it easier for everyone. Okay, no one is policing an increasingly emboldened press. This isn't just about phone hacking, it's about the accountability of power. Power that informs but is being used to brainwash people. They have created a stalemate society where they can enrage the public over the most mundane and petty things to distract from the critical issues for our country and communities. In short, the people and the newspaper organisations who hack people's voicemails have never been brought to justice and are now more emboldened because of it. They believe they can do anything they want and get away with it, while making huge sums of money from it. If they're supposedly policing society, then who is policing them? Okay, and again, this is a reason why me, like as a socialist, and because, as someone who talks about dynamics, abuse dynamics, oppressive dynamics, everything he says here just really appeals to me. It is about accountability. those in power need to be held accountable, right? And this is why, again, I hope that Harry becomes an anti-monarchist, because he's so nearly there with this. You know, the idea that our elected representatives, you know, we should elect them. We're a democracy. We should choose our representatives and they work for us, you know, in our interests. They shouldn't be serving themselves. Now, for a long time, I've often thought that if there were no tabloids, if we could take out the tabloids somehow, we would live in a beautiful society, because every time a problem comes up, anytime someone wants to solve a problem, the tabloids come in and monster them. Right? And we know they do this. It's really, really obvious. You know, they stir up hatred towards communities, and essentially, you know, the cynical, awful nature of it is that the people in charge of these magazines make a lot of money out of it, and essentially they don't want to get taxed. Right? That's it. So Jeremy Corbyn was a huge threat to them, because they thought, oh no, you know, maybe we'll get held to account. They're just bullies. And they do distract from critical issues in the country. And essentially, I think that's part of what the monarchy does, right? The fairy tale of the monarchy. You know, when you see the worst things happening here, like the cost of living crisis and people using food banks, and then you see like William and Kate sent out to go to a food bank and not bring any food, and I think that again happened at some sort of baby clothes situation. You know, it's basically just a smokescreen. I have to go, so I'm gonna like try and wrap this up, but I talk about this in my socialist videos. It's a smokescreen, right? They create these hate figures, they create this outrage over silly, silly things to hide the fact, and that's the whole point of the coronation, right? We're in a cost of living crisis. It's absolutely appalling. People are using food banks, the energy bills are going up, people are not coping, the NHS doesn't have enough funding, the people are on strike all the time, things aren't working, systems aren't working, and, you know, essentially I think that's happening because the idea from the people at the top is to kind of privatise to make more money. But essentially it's all distractions, and that's how it works. It's like, oh, look over there. We would have a nicer society if we weren't being distracted by these things. And that's why we have to get wise to these dynamics, not just in the tabloids. Once you understand these dynamics, you can apply them to any situation. And the thing is, if there were enough of us together, I talk about this in political videos, the idea of solidarity. If enough of us stood together and said, no, we don't believe it, we're not going to go along with that, you know, we're not throwing anyone under the bus, we're not taking on any scapegoat, you know, we're not going to suddenly turn on trans people or turn on refugees or something, we would have huge power against the press. They try and divide us deliberately. Okay, and last of all, but James Murdoch, son of Rupert, is a kindred spirit. He, James Murdoch, made a real effort to try and come and talk to me, despite my security detail trying to keep me away from him. Presumably they thought I'd get into a heated argument with him or worse. I got the distinct impression that, having broken away from the cult that is the Murdoch dynasty, he was starting to show signs that he wanted to do things differently and to make amends for the past. Given that he had broken away from his family's history, and I was about to do the same with mine, I felt that we were kindred spirits of sorts. My wife and I subsequently had a Zoom call with him and his wife when I was on the Aspen Commission for Digital Information. I also remember congratulating him for going in a different direction to his father. I think that speaks for itself. As a Succession fan, what a Kendall Roy moment that is. But yeah, essentially, Harry's whole thing is things only get better if we look back at the past, if we make changes, we do things differently, and we acknowledge these things, right? This is pretty, I mean, he's making it pretty clear that he is going in a different direction to his own father, calling them kindred spirits. I don't really feel like there's much more to say. But it is fascinating again, though, isn't it, that Harry is always presented as angry, always presented as difficult, yet he's always peacemaking. He's always trying to find connections. He's always trying to find community with people. And he's always speaking what's on his mind and is willing to do that from his own mouth. It's really fascinating. Anyway, I've really got to go. So thank you so much for watching this. Please put your thoughts, any comments you have in the comment section. I've got a ton of videos coming. I'm going to try and make as many as I can in the lead up to the coronation because it's getting really weird over here. There's an oath being taken, by the way, that people can take. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, I'll see you guys really soon. Thanks for watching. Sorry this is ending so abruptly, and yeah, love you loads. Be safe. Love you. Bye.